Welcome back to Generation Sick, the power, politics, and propaganda behind America's health crisis. Written by Dr. Vic Naumov. Copyright 2016. All rights reserved. Last episode, we looked at conditioning, addiction, and the psychology behind why we reach for a pill so quickly. Today, we're covering chapters 16 and 17. And this is a real shift in tone. After 15 chapters spent mostly diagnosing what's wrong with the system, Dr. Naumov turns to something more personal: physical resilience and the food we put into our bodies every single day.
Let's get into it.
Dr. Naumov opens chapter 16, titled Backbone, with a trio of quotes celebrating discipline and physical vitality. Vladimir Horowitz on daring, Jack LaLanne declaring that physical culture and nutrition are, in his words, the salvation of America, and a cluster of famous lines about hard work and persistence, usually attributed to figures like Edison, Einstein, and Nietzsche. From there, Dr. Naumov celebrates the kind of extraordinary physical achievement that reminds us what the human body is actually capable of. Olympic-level gymnastics, world-class athletes, dancers like Mikhail Baryshnikov and Misty Copeland. His broader argument is that watching elite physical performance shouldn't just be passive entertainment. It should be a genuine call to action, an invitation to move our own bodies more, push our own limits, and reject the kind of learned passivity that tells us, from childhood onward, to sit still and stay safe. He spends real time on the story of Jack LaLanne, and it's a genuinely great one. LaLanne describes himself as a self-described sugarholic junk food junkie as a teenager before finding fitness and nutrition at age 15 and completely transforming his life. LaLanne went on to become America's first television fitness personality, famously swimming handcuffed and shackled from Alcatraz to the mainland, and at age 70, towing 70 boats, some with passengers aboard, using nothing but a rope held in his teeth. Dr. Naumov holds LaLanne up as living proof that physical transformation is possible at any age, through sustained discipline rather than any kind of shortcut. He also tells the story of actor Christopher Reeve, best known for playing Superman, who became paralyzed after a horseback riding accident. Dr. Naumov's point here is genuinely moving. Even after the accident, Reeve's underlying strength and determination, the same qualities that had defined his physical career, translated into an active life from his wheelchair. He wrote books, advocated tirelessly for spinal cord research funding, and never lost hope, even though he never did walk again. Dr. Naumov frames backbone, in the title sense of the chapter, as something that goes far beyond physical fitness. It's a quality of character that determines how anyone responds to whatever challenge life puts in front of them. This chapter also gives Dr. Naumov space to explain his own clinical philosophy as a doctor of chiropractic in real detail, and it's worth hearing in his own words. He describes two foundational principles of his practice: that motion is life, and that structure affects function. His clinical goal, as he describes it, is to identify any biomechanical dysfunction in a patient's spine, what chiropractors call a vertebral subluxation, and to introduce a precise, targeted adjustment to that segment. He's careful to draw a distinction here. What he does, in his words, is not a generic manipulation, but a specific reset intended to clear interference along the nerve pathways connecting the brain, spinal cord, and the rest of the body. His underlying belief is that the more freely that communication can flow, the greater the body's natural capacity to adapt. which loops back to the adaptability factor framework we covered all the way back in Episode 5. His practical advice in this chapter is refreshingly simple. Exercise regularly and intensely, because the body, like a house, will fall apart without active maintenance. He's pointed in his criticism of doctors who present medication, like statins, as an equally valid substitute for actual physical activity, repeating his now familiar challenge. If drugs were truly the path to health, shouldn't the people taking the most of them be the healthiest people around? He closes the chapter on a note of stubborn optimism, even though he acknowledges that powerful institutional forces, insurance companies, the pharmaceutical industry, big banks and tech companies have enormous influence over how healthcare in America actually works. He doesn't see himself as fighting a hopeless battle. His hope, in his own words, is that the next generation, the patients who grow up trusting fresh air and sunshine over pills and prescriptions, will be the ones who end up healthier, stronger, and more resilient than the generation raised entirely inside the current system. Chapter 17. You are what you eat, takes Dr. Naumov's philosophy and applies it directly to the dinner table. He opens by pointing out something genuinely true about American culture: how deeply food is woven into our entertainment, our competitions, our sense of identity, often more than politics, literature, or sports combined. From there, he widens the lens to talk about how dramatically the global food supply has changed in just the last few generations, pointing out that everyday produce many of us take for granted, like bananas or apples, were once rare, special occasion items in parts of the world not too long ago. His core argument in this chapter is that despite living in an era of food abundance, much of what's actually available to most Americans on a daily basis is heavily processed, engineered for taste and shelf life rather than nutrition, and sold to us through relentless, sophisticated marketing. He's sharply critical of how thoroughly processed food has worked its way into nearly every part of daily life. Gyms handing out cereal bars, TV dinners replacing real cooking, food and entertainment merging into one continuous experience. He does give credit where it's due, pointing to real public health wins like reducing soda portion sizes, removing trans fats from baked goods, and the growing push for organic and non-GMO food options as genuine, if incomplete, progress. But his broader frustration is that for every small regulatory win, food companies find new ways to engineer products that look healthier on the label while remaining just as processed underneath. Dr. Naumov shares that he personally adopted a significantly modified diet that dramatically improved how he felt physically, built around a core idea that's actually grounded in real, if contested, science: the relationship between dietary acidity and overall health. He's upfront that he doesn't follow any single diet system strictly or without modification, and he's explicit that his goal in sharing this isn't to convert every listener to one specific eating plan. His own words on this are worth repeating directly. All roads lead to Rome, in his view, and what matters most is a steady, sustained focus on nourishing your body well, however you choose to get there. Now, it's worth pausing here to add some important context, since Dr. Naumov leans heavily in this chapter on the work of Dr. Otto Heinrich Warburg, the Nobel laureate who proposed in the 1920s that cancer cells thrive in a more acidic, lower oxygen cellular environment. That observation about cancer cell metabolism is real and historically significant. But the broader claim that followed from it in popular alternative health circles, that eating alkaline foods can meaningfully shift your blood's overall pH and thereby prevent or cure disease isn't supported by mainstream medical science. Human blood pH is tightly regulated by the body within an extremely narrow range, regardless of diet, and significant deviation from that range is actually a medical emergency, not something diet can meaningfully influence either direction. The genuinely well-supported part of this conversation is simpler and less dramatic. Diets built around whole, minimally processed foods, rich in fruits and vegetables, are consistently linked to better health outcomes for reasons that don't require the specific alkaline blood mechanism to be true. Where Dr. Naumov's argument lands most solidly in this chapter is his comparison between the food industry and other industries that have historically concealed what they knew about their own products' harms, pointing to real, documented cases like the tobacco industry's decades-long concealment of smoking's cancer risk and Volkswagen's emissions scandal, where a company's public claims and internal knowledge were proven to be very different things. His point is a fair one. Large food companies have enormous financial incentive to make heavily processed products taste irresistible and appear healthier than they really are. And a healthy dose of skepticism toward bold health claims on packaging is always warranted. He closes the chapter by returning to Hippocrates' famous line, "Let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food," and argues that reconnecting with whole, minimally processed food is one of the most powerful, accessible tools any of us have for improving our own health, regardless of which specific dietary philosophy you ultimately choose to follow. That's it for Episode 9 of Generation Sick. If today's episode has you thinking differently about what's actually in your next meal, that's worth paying attention to. And as always, if you're considering a significant change to your diet, it's worth having that conversation with a doctor or registered dietitian who knows your full health picture. In the next episode, we keep moving forward. If you want to be there when it drops, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. And if today's episode gave you something to think about, share it with someone who needs to hear it. That's how we restore the power to the people, one listener at a time. I'm narrating Generation Sick by Dr. Vic Naumov. I'll see you in Episode 10.